The moment Jessie stumbled through the saloon doors, the wind slapped her face like a cruel reminder that she was alone. Dust swirled around her boots, catching in the folds of her faded blue dress, and the wooden boards beneath her feet groaned with every step. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing the bitter truth she had refused to see. Colt Maddox, the man she had trusted with her heart and her future, had abandoned her. He hadn't left a note, not really just a flimsy scrap of paper with scrawled excuses that couldn't carry the weight of his betrayal. The streets of Red Rock Canyon stretched before her like a stage set frozen in the harsh glare of the morning sun. Clapboard buildings cast long, empty shadows, and the wind whistled through the narrow alleyways like the laughter of ghosts. Jessie's cheeks burned with humiliation, and her hands trembled as she tightened her grip on the reins of her horse. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and lonely, answering the emptiness that settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Every instinct in her screamed that she should run, hide, or cry herself into the dust, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not when she had to find Colt and demand the answers he had left unspoken, and then she saw him. Or rather, she saw someone. A figure moving with a grace that seemed almost impossible in the unforgiving desert. Tall, barefoot, young and powerful, with long black hair that tumbled over broad shoulders like liquid shadow. His skin, bronzed and smooth, glimmered in the fa. Harsh sunlight and the faint jingling of tribal jewelry hinted at a life lived in harmony with the land. Jessie blinked, unsure if exhaustion or hope made her see him so clearly. He stopped a few feet away, not approaching too quickly, not intruding, just watching with a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Are you lost?" he asked. In English, his voice soft yet carrying the authority of someone who had grown up in the wild, someone who could survive in places most would fear to tread. I don't know," Jessie admitted, her voice trembling. "I need to find someone. Colt Maddox. He left me." Her words cracked on the last syllable, raw with hurt and disbelief. The young Apache warrior's eyes softened, though his expression remained steady, like the desert itself, calm, unyielding, patient. "I can help you," he said simply. "But first you must trust me." Jessie wanted to shake her head, to scoff, to tell him no, she had learned the hard way that trusting men was dangerous, but something in his gaze, something in the way he stood rooted yet ready to move, made her pause. Perhaps it was the certainty in his stance, or the way the wind seemed to bend around him without fear. Perhaps it was the desperate, aching hope in her own heart that whispered she might not have to face this wilderness alone. "Who are you?" she asked, the words barely a whisper against the roar of the wind. "Tayan," he replied, his lips curling in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I know these lands. I know the canyons, the ridges, the rivers that hide danger, and the paths that lead to safety. I can help you find him." Jessie's pulse quickened. The desert around them smelled of sage and dust, and the sun cast everything in a golden haze, making the world seem both harsh and beautiful at once. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her, the scorching sun turning the dirt beneath her horse's hooves into a dry, powdery surface that seemed to crack under the promise of more trouble. And yet there was something about Tayan, standing there like a sentinel of the wilderness, that made her believe she might survive what lay ahead. She took a deep breath, the wind whipping tears from her eyes, and nodded. "All right," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'll trust you." Tayan inclined his head once, silently acknowledging her courage. Together, they stepped out of the empty street and into the first winding path of the desert trails. Jessie, gripping the reins, her mind a jumble of fear, anger, and fragile hope. Somewhere in the distance, the faint cry of a hawk split the air, a sharp reminder that the desert watched them, waited for them to fail or succeed. And Jessie, for the first time since Colt had abandoned her, felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in the world. Jessie's hands were raw from gripping the reins, her knuckles white as her horse picked its way over the uneven desert terrain. The sun hung high, beating down like an unforgiving judge, turning the sand into a dry, powdery surface that cracked beneath every hoofbeat. Behind her, Tayan moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never been afraid of the wilderness. His bare feet made no sound as he ran alongside the horse, long black hair glinting in the sunlight, muscles taut and glistening, tribal jewelry rattling faintly with each motion. Jessie couldn't help but glance at him more than once, surprised at the strength and assurance he carried without arrogance. The canyons ahead split in two directions, Tayan said, his voice calm but commanding. One leads to a water source, the other to high ridges where bandits sometimes hide. We must take the path along the ridge. It's safer and faster. Jessie nodded, her throat tight. She was learning quickly that Tayan didn't offer suggestions. He gave instructions as if the desert itself spoke through him. Every step, every twist in the path seemed deliberate, and for the first time since Colt had disappeared, Jessie felt a flicker of hope that she might catch up to him, or at least survive the chase. As they rode, the landscape shifted from flat, dusty plains to narrow canyons where jagged rocks clawed at the sky. The wind whistled through the gaps, carrying with it the scent of sage and hot sand, mingling with the faint metallic tang of dried blood from some unknown skirmish long past. Jessie shivered despite the heat, and Tayan noticed, pausing to offer a water skin. She took it, grateful, and for a brief moment felt human again, not just a discarded bride wandering in the unforgiving West. "You've been alone here long?" Jessie asked cautiously, breaking the silence. Tayan glanced at her, his dark eyes unreadable yet steady. "Long enough to know where the earth hides secrets," he replied. His words were cryptic but not unkind. Jessie studied him carefully, noticing the way his muscles moved under sun-darkened skin, the fine lines of his arms and shoulders honed from years of running, hunting, surviving. He was more than just a guide. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of the desert itself. They rode in silence for miles, punctuated only by the distant call of a hawk or the scraping of a lizard across a sun-baked rock. Jessie's thoughts drifted to Colt, his smug smile, the easy charm that had first drawn her in. She wondered what had frightened him so much that he would flee at dawn, leaving her alone with nothing but dust and betrayal. And yet, the anger that had burned in her chest was tempered by the quiet, steady presence of Tayan. He didn't rush her, didn't demand explanations. He simply existed as a pillar of strength, letting her emotions rise and fall like the wind over the canyons. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow, dry creek bed, its rocks jagged and sharp under the sun. Tayan dropped to his knees, brushing his fingers over the sand with a practiced precision. "Tracks," he said softly. "Not just from horses. A man ran through here recently." He went north, then turned west along the ridge. Jessie leaned closer, studying the marks. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw Colt's hurried footprints mingled with those of another, perhaps one of the bandits Tayan had warned about. Panic rose in her chest, but Tayan's steady hand on her shoulder grounded her. "We will catch him," he said, voice low but certain. "The desert never forgets its trails, and neither will we." Night began to fall, the sun bleeding red behind the distant ridges, painting the sky with fire and shadows. Jessie and Tayan set up a small camp near the creek bed. Jessie's horse grazed quietly while Tayan knelt to inspect the surroundings, eyes sharp, alert, every sense tuned to the dangers of the desert night. Jessie wrapped herself in her thin shawl, shivering as the temperature dropped sharply, the wind carrying a chill she hadn't anticipated. Around the small fire, Jessie finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. "Why are you helping?" "Me?" she asked softly. "I don't even know you. You could just leave me here." Tayan looked at her, his gaze steady and unwavering, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Because sometimes people need someone to see them through the desert, Jessie. And because you have not yet lost your fire." Jessie stared into the flames, the truth of his words settling in her chest. She had been abandoned, humiliated, and scared beyond measure, but now, for the first time in days, she felt a fragile sense of hope. With Tayan by her side, the desert no longer seemed endless and merciless. It had become a path, a dangerous, uncertain path, but a path she could walk with someone who believed she could survive it. And as the stars began to pierce the night sky, Jessie realized that their journey was only beginning. Somewhere out there, Colt Maddox was running from consequences he had tried to escape, but with Tayan guiding her, Jessie would find him. And when she did, she would no longer be the helpless bride abandoned in the dust. Night had fallen like a heavy velvet blanket over the desert, and the temperature dropped so sharply that Jessie shivered beneath her thin shawl. The stars, sharp and brilliant in the ink-black sky, glimmered like distant promises, silent witnesses to the world below, where danger and betrayal waited. The wind carried a faint metallic tang, perhaps from distant gunfire, perhaps from the unspoken violence of the desert. Jessie's horse stamped nervously, its hooves kicking up clouds of dust that caught the firelight from their small camp. Tayan knelt beside the fire, his bare feet brushing the warm sand, the flickering flames illuminating the contours of his shirtless, muscular torso. His long black hair fell in a dark curtain around his shoulders, and the tribal jewelry he wore, a mix of beads and small silver charms, rattled faintly with each movement. Every line of his body spoke of years spent in the wild, hunting, tracking, surviving. Yet his eyes, sharp and alert, held a calmness that grounded Jessie in a way nothing else had since Colt's betrayal. Jessie wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the sting of past humiliation and the weight of loneliness. She had been abandoned by a man who promised love and protection, left with nothing but dust in her hair and betrayal in her heart. "Why do you help me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "I'm just a woman, alone and foolish. You don't have to risk yourself for me." Tayan's gaze softened, though he didn't break his focus on the surrounding desert. "Because you have not yet lost your fire," he said, his voice calm, low, and certain. "And sometimes the desert chooses to show mercy not to the weak, but to those who still dare to stand." Jessie's chest tightened at his words. She had always imagined survival as a solitary fight, as something she had to endure alone. But Tayan had changed that perspective. He wasn't just a guide. He was a force of nature, a living bridge between danger and safety. His presence reminded her that strength could be shared and courage could be taught silently without a single word wasted on empty praise. The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the star-speckled sky. Jessie's thoughts drifted back to Colt, the man she had trusted with her future. She could still feel the sting of his smirk, the charm he used to mask fear and greed. The desert had revealed him for what he was, a man unable to face responsibility, a man willing to abandon love for the sake of self-preservation. She swallowed hard, anger rising in her throat, but Tayan's quiet presence reminded her that revenge wasn't the immediate goal. Survival was, and perhaps in time, justice would follow. Tayan began inspecting the surrounding terrain, running his fingers over the sand and small stones, reading the marks left by travelers and animals alike. "Tracks," he murmured, pointing to faint indentations in the dirt. "Someone passed here recently." Your man hasn't gone far. The wind is against him. It carries his scent and his fear." Jessie leaned closer, eyes narrowing. She could see the faint marks of a hurried journey, etched into the sand. Colt had been here, she realized, fleeing the consequences he thought he could escape. Panic rose in her chest, but Tayan's calm, steady hands on the horse's reins and on her shoulder rooted her. "We will catch him," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "The desert never forgets its trails. And neither will we." The night grew colder and the firelight danced across Tayan's bronze skin, highlighting the sharp angles of his face and the taut power of his muscles. Jessie noticed the strength in his body mirrored the steadiness in his gaze, a promise that, whatever lay ahead, she would not face it alone. She felt a flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, taking root in her chest. For the first time since Colt had abandoned her, Jessie allowed herself to believe she could survive. Not only survive, but fight back. With Tayan guiding her through the perilous canyons, across the ridges, and into the heart of the unforgiving desert, she realized that betrayal did not have to define her. She could reclaim her life and perhaps even find something unexpected: trust, loyalty, and a bond stronger than the loneliness she had carried for so long. The stars burned bright above, the desert whispering its secrets in the wind. Jessie, sitting by the fire with Tayan watching over her, felt a strange calm settle in her chest. The journey was only beginning, but for the first time, she was ready to face it head on. Somewhere out there, Colt Maddox was running, but Jessie would find him. And when she did, she would no longer be the frightened, abandoned bride wandering through the dust. She would be a woman with courage, allies, and the unbreakable strength of the desert at her back. The sun rose blood orange over the desert ridges, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. Jessie's horse picked its way over the rocky path, hooves clattering against stone as she tried to steady her racing heart. The air was dry and sharp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust, with every step echoing against the narrow canyon walls. Jessie's hands ached from gripping the reins, but Tayan ran beside her, shirtless and muscular, the sunlight glinting off his bronze skin and tribal jewelry. His long black hair whipped in the wind, framing a face set with alert intensity, every movement radiating the confidence of a man born in the wilderness. For hours they had tracked Colt's fleeing trail, following broken twigs, footprints, and the faint smell of tobacco lingering in the desert wind. Jessie had begun to feel a fragile sense of control, a cautious hope that she might reclaim some part of her life from the man who had abandoned her. But as the canyon narrowed, a low rumble of hooves echoed from the shadows ahead, and Jessie's stomach dropped. "Stop," Tayan whispered, holding up a hand. His eyes scanned the canyon entrance, sharp and calculating. "We're not alone." Jessie's heart thudded violently. From the corner of the canyon, a cloud of dust rose, revealing a group of riders, rough men on worn horses, faces masked by the brim of hats and bandanas, guns glinting in the morning light. Colt? Or a band of outlaws lying in wait? Jessie's breath caught in her throat, fear and adrenaline intertwining. Tayan moved instinctively, positioning himself between Jessie and the riders. The sunlight glinted off his bare, muscular chest as he crouched slightly, ready to spring. He whispered in a calm, low voice, "Stay close, trust me." Jessie's eyes widened, panic rising, but she nodded. She felt the strength in his presence, the unwavering confidence that had become her anchor over the last few days. Tayan had taught her to trust the desert, and now she trusted him. The riders approached, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that stung Jessie's eyes and throat. Guns were raised, fingers tightening on triggers, and the air seemed to thicken with danger. Tayan shifted his stance, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. He gestured for Jessie to follow a subtle path along the canyon's jagged edge. They moved swiftly, Jessie's horse responding to Tayan's expert guidance. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up rocks and dust in jagged clouds. Jessie's pulse raced, each second stretching into eternity. Tayan's movements were fluid, precise and effortless, dodging, weaving, and keeping them out of the line of fire. She noticed the intensity in his eyes, a predator's focus, and the way his long black hair streamed behind him like a shadow of power. A bullet slammed into a canyon wall, sending up a shower of rocks and dust. Jessie cried out, gripping the reins tighter, but Tayan remained composed. He nudged her horse forward with a deft hand, guiding her down a narrow, hidden path barely visible in the rocky terrain. The riders hesitated, unsure of the terrain, and the moment was enough doubt by the time the last outlaw turned to pursue. Jessie and Tayan had gained a small advantage, disappearing into a narrow gorge that forced the horses to move single file. Jessie's legs ached, her heart pounded, but she felt a fierce surge of gratitude and awe for Tayan's skill. She realized then that he was more than just a guide. He was her shield, her anchor, and perhaps the first true ally she had ever known. When the dust finally settled and the canyon fell silent again, Jessie dismounted, breathing heavily. Tayan was already scanning the terrain, alert even in the quiet. "They won't follow us far," he said, voice low but steady. "The canyon favors those who know its secrets." Jessie's chest heaved as she wiped sweat and dust from her face. Her heart was still racing, adrenaline leaving her both exhausted and strangely exhilarated. She glanced at Tayan, who was catching his breath but remained vigilant, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Trust, deep and unspoken, mingled with the faintest hint of admiration. For the first time since Colt had abandoned her, Jessie felt the stirrings of courage. She had survived an ambush that could have ended in blood and defeat. She had not faced it alone, and with Tayan beside her, she knew that whatever lay ahead, the trails, the ridges, the deserts, and ultimately the man who had betrayed her, she would face it with strength, guided by a young warrior who had become far more than a protector. Desert stretched endlessly before them, jagged, merciless, and beautiful. Jessie mounted her horse again, gripping the reins with renewed determination. Tayan fell into step beside her, shirtless and imposing, a living symbol of survival and resilience. Together, they rode deeper into the wilderness, ready for whatever trials awaited them. The sun had climbed high, its heat pressing down on the desert like a relentless weight. Jessie wiped sweat from her brow, feeling the grit of sand cling to her skin and the fabric of her dress. Her horse moved carefully along the jagged path, wary of loose stones and hidden crevices, and Jessie's muscles ached from days of riding through the harsh terrain. Every step reminded her of how far she had come since Colt Maddox had abandoned her, and yet the trail of the man she sought remained elusive. Beside her, Tayan ran barefoot, shirtless, the sunlight glinting off his bronze skin and tribal jewelry. His long black hair whipped behind him, framing a face calm yet alert, every movement fluid and precise. Jessie had grown accustomed to the sound of his breathing, the rhythm of his steps, and the subtle strength that seemed to radiate from him. Without a word. Today, she realized he had become more than just a protector, he was a teacher, guiding her through the desert with instincts honed by years of survival. They reached the ruins of an old trading post, a skeletal reminder of a time when the desert had once bustled with travelers and traders. The walls were weathered and cracked, and the windows gaped like empty eyes, staring out into the endless expanse of sand and rock. Tayan led Jessie inside, careful to avoid broken boards and sharp debris. The air smelled of sun-baked wood, dust, and the faint tang of old leather. "Here," he said, they could rest and reassess without being seen. Jessie dismounted, letting her legs stretch, and studied Tayan. "How do you always know where to go?" she asked, her voice hoarse from riding and worry. "How can you track him?" "Like this?" Tayan crouched beside the dirt floor, fingers brushing over tiny stones and faint marks. "The desert tells its stories if you know how to listen," he said softly. Tracks, broken twigs, the wind over sand. Every detail matters. You see things, but only notice when you know what to look for. Jessie leaned closer, trying to read the faint imprints in the dust, but she only saw random marks. Tayan watched her carefully, then guided her hands, showing her how to follow the subtle clues left by Colt and others who had passed this way. She realized that this was more than tracking. It was learning to read the desert itself, to understand its patterns, its dangers, and its secrets. As the afternoon sun poured through the broken windows, Jessie spoke for the first time about her fear, her humiliation, and the sense of abandonment that had shadowed her every step. She told Tayan about Colt, the empty promises, the charming words that had concealed cowardice and greed, the sudden disappearance that left her stranded in the merciless desert. Tayan listened, silent but attentive, his eyes never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt or offer easy platitudes. He simply absorbed her words, allowing her to speak, to unburden herself. Jessie realized then how rare it was to find someone who would truly listen, who would not judge, who would not abandon her in her moment of weakness. After a moment, Tayan spoke, his voice low and steady. "You are stronger than you think," he said. "The desert has tested you, but you endure. That is more than most can claim, and you are not alone anymore." Jessie felt a warmth spread through her chest, a fragile but undeniable hope. She had been walking through the desert weighed down by betrayal, but now she felt the possibility of strength, of trust, of survival. Tayan had become her ally, her shield, and perhaps, in ways she hadn't yet understood, her compass. As they prepared to leave the trading post, Tayan led Jessie to the edge of a small ridge, where the desert stretched out in all directions, endless dunes, jagged rocks, and hidden valleys. "Colt went this way," Tayan said, pointing toward a faint trail that wound through the ridges. "We must follow carefully. There are dangers ahead, not just from him, but from others who may cross our path." Jessie mounted her horse, her grip firmer than before. She felt the first true surge of determination since her journey began. With Tayan by her side, she would navigate the desert, follow the trail, and confront the man who had abandoned her. But more than that, she had begun to understand that survival and courage weren't just about chasing someone, they were about finding strength in unexpected places and forging bonds where none had existed before. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, the golden sun igniting the horizon as Jessie and Tayan rode deeper into the wilderness. Each step forward was a step away from fear and toward empowerment, and Jessie felt a small, stubborn flame of hope ignite within her. With Tayan as her guide, her protector, and her unexpected ally, the desert no longer seemed endless. It became a path of possibility, of reckoning, and perhaps of redemption. The sun burned low on the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the desert ridges. Jessie's horse stumbled over loose stones, and she gripped the reins tightly, sweat mixing with dust on her brow. Every muscle in her body was tense, her mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination. The trail had led them to a small frontier town, its buildings huddled against the edge of the desert like weathered old soldiers. Somewhere among them, Colt Maddox awaited, oblivious to the storm he had unleashed by abandoning her. Tayan moved beside her, shirtless, muscular, and powerful, long black hair whipping in the dry wind. The sunlight glinted off the tribal jewelry he wore, glimmering with every calculated step. His bronze skin and taut muscles exuded strength and authority, and Jessie felt a wave of reassurance wash over her. With Tayan at her side, she no longer felt helpless or exposed. She felt protected, guided, and strangely capable of confronting the man who had wronged her. They entered the town cautiously, moving along dusty streets lined with weathered wooden buildings. A faint scent of smoke and stale coffee drifted from the saloon doors, mingling with the desert's dry, pungent heat. Jessie's heart thumped in her chest as they approached the small square, where a few townsfolk moved about, indifferent to the tension that hung over her like a storm cloud. And then she saw him. Colt Maddox lounged outside the saloon, leaning against the post of the porch with a careless grin, boots propped on the railing. He wore the same smug expression she remembered, the same arrogance that had hidden his cowardice. Jessie felt a surge of anger, her pulse spiking. The man who had left her in the dust, who had treated her as if her heart were disposable, now lounged as if the world owed him nothing but indulgence. "Stay close," Tayan murmured, his voice low and steady. His dark eyes scanned the street, measuring the distance, the angles and the obstacles, muscles coiled like a panther ready to strike. Jessie nodded, gripping the reins, trying to steady her shaking hands. She approached Colt, every step measured and deliberate. The townsfolk gave a wide berth, sensing the tension radiating from her and Tayan. Colt's eyes widened slightly as he recognized her, but his grin remained, an instinctive mask he couldn't remove. "Jessie," he drawled, tipping his hat with false charm. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Save it," Jessie snapped, her voice strong and clear. "You left me. You abandoned your vows, your promises. And me? And now I've found you." Colt's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. He glanced at Tayan, whose imposing shirtless form radiated silent threat. The young warrior's eyes were sharp, unyielding, and unwavering. He didn't raise his weapon, but his presence alone carried the weight of a force the desert had honed to perfection. "You think you can," Colt began, but Jessie cut him off. "I know I can," she said, her voice steady. "I've survived the desert. I've tracked you. I've faced dangers you couldn't even imagine, and I did it with someone who actually knows what strength looks like." Her eyes flicked to Tayan, whose calm intensity seemed to freeze Colt in place. "And now you'll face the consequences of abandoning me." Colt took a step back, realizing for the first time that he was not in control. Jessie felt a surge of triumph, not from cruelty, but from empowerment. She had endured betrayal, hardship, and fear, yet here she stood, unbroken, with a young warrior by her side who had shown her what loyalty and courage truly meant. Tayan remained close, vigilant but restrained. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His stance, his muscles taut and ready, spoke volumes. Colt understood that any move against Jessie would be met with a force beyond his reckoning. For the first time, Jessie felt the power of not being alone. She could confront Colt, demand accountability, and reclaim her life not through fear, but through courage, resilience, and the unspoken bond she had forged with Tayan. The desert, which had once seemed endless and merciless, now felt like a place of reckoning where justice and survival walked hand in hand. Colt swallowed hard, his usual charm stripped away, leaving only the stark reality of a man who had underestimated both a woman and the young warrior who protected her. Jessie's chest heaved, the wind of the desert tangling her hair around her face, but her eyes remained unwavering. She had survived the desert. She had survived betrayal. And now, with Tayan at her side, she was ready to face the man who had abandoned her, and finally step into the life she was determined to reclaim. The wind whipped across the main street of the frontier town, carrying dust and the scent of sun-baked wood. Jessie's horse shifted nervously beneath her, but her grip on the reins was steady now. After days of tracking, hours of survival through the harsh desert and facing ambushes and fear, she was finally standing in front of Colt Maddox. The man who had abandoned her, leaving her alone and humiliated in the wilderness, now faced the reckoning he could not escape. Beside her, Tayan stood like a statue of the desert itself, shirtless, muscular, with long black hair flowing over his broad shoulders and tribal jewelry glinting in the late afternoon sun. His bronze skin gleamed with sweat, muscles taut, and his dark eyes scanned every corner of the street, alert for any threat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make Colt falter. The young warrior radiated confidence, skill, and the calm certainty of someone who had mastered the harshest environment imaginable. Colt straightened, trying to mask his unease with a forced grin. "Jessie," he said, voice tight, you don't get to speak." Jessie cut him off, her voice firm, echoing in the quiet street. "You left me. You abandoned your vows, your promises, everything. And now it's time you answer for that." Colt's eyes darted to Tayan, whose gaze didn't waver. The warrior's stance was steady and imposing, every muscle coiled like a predator ready to strike. Jessie felt the surge of strength that came from having someone who would not let her be intimidated, someone whose power and loyalty were absolute. For the first time, she felt she could face anything. You don't understand," Colt stammered, taking a cautious step backward. "I know," Jessie said, voice rising, carrying the weight of every betrayal, every desert mile, every sleepless night. "I understand perfectly. You were scared. You didn't want responsibility. You left me to rot in the sand. But I survived. I followed you. And now you will face what you've done." The townsfolk, who had been cautiously watching from windows and doorways, murmured among themselves. No one dared intervene. The presence of the young warrior, bare-chested and powerful, commanded silent respect. He shifted slightly, moving to stand between Jessie and any potential threat. Yet his eyes remained locked on Colt, warning without words that violence would meet any reckless move. Colt swallowed hard. His usual charm stripped away, revealing the fear he had long buried beneath arrogance. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, but Jessie didn't flinch. She felt the power of her own survival and the unwavering support of Tayan beside her. For the first time, she realized that justice didn't have to be violent sometimes. It was simply the act of standing tall, demanding accountability, and refusing to be a victim any longer. I'm sorry," Colt muttered, his voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I didn't know." Jessie shook her head, anger and resolution mixing in her chest. "Sorry doesn't fix what you did. You left me alone in the desert, and now you face the consequences." She signaled to Tayan, who stepped slightly forward, his imposing figure a clear statement that he would back her up if needed. The wind stirred, lifting dust in swirling columns around them. Jessie's eyes narrowed, her resolve sharpened by the trials of the last days. She had survived betrayal, ambushes, and the merciless desert itself. With Tayan at her side, she knew she would survive anything the world threw at her. Colt's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him as he realized the depth of Jessie's newfound strength and the unyielding presence of Tayan. The desert had tested her, and she had emerged stronger, smarter, and unbreakable. She didn't need to strike him. The knowledge that she had endured and he had not was enough. Jessie mounted her horse slowly, feeling Tayan move alongside her. Together, they left the town square, dust rising in their wake, the sun setting in a fiery glow behind the ridges. Jessie's heart felt lighter, her spirit unshackled from fear and betrayal. She had reclaimed her dignity, her power, and her life. As they rode into the desert, Jessie glanced at Tayan, gratitude and admiration shining in her eyes. He gave her a small, approving nod, long black hair catching the dying sunlight. Together, they disappeared into the golden haze of the desert, two survivors bound by trust, courage, and an unspoken understanding. The desert stretched endlessly before them, harsh, beautiful, and filled with possibility. And for the first time, Jessie felt that the future was hers to command. The past had abandoned her, but the desert and Tayan had given her everything she needed to survive.